Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is someone I consider a mentor to me, Dr. Daniel Parkinson. Welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Hello. Good morning.
Back in 2016, when I decided to be an ally and was looking for help, I was posting a little bit on Facebook about supporting LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and Daniel Parkinson reached out to me. I scrolled back in all our messages, Daniel, and on 16th of August, 2016, Daniel Parkinson started to connect me with Facebook groups that were just extraordinarily helpful for me. One of them, I'm sure Daniel will talk about, is a Facebook group he started for parents, LDS parents of LGBTQ kids, called I'll Walk With You. We'll put that in the show notes. And I joined that group. They let me in even though I'm not a parent of an LGBTQ kiddo, and really helped me to understand the space. And he kept pointing me and navigating me to groups that would be helpful. And I just recognized this is someone that cares so much about LGBTQ youth, and recognized I, as an ally in the church, could be a voice of support. And I just think that's reflective of Dan's heart and the book he's written and the work he does. He's a doctor of psychiatry. He lives in Minnesota. He grew up in Ogden. We are the same age, 63. I'm 9 months older, so there.
Yeah.
And the book he is going to talk about is a book he's written called Gender Revealed, Becoming Male or Female. And obviously, as a doctor of psychology and his psychiatry and his own personal story, he's got great insights. Science and research are friends to understand sexual orientation or gender identity. This book, I think, is a terrific book. I also got to give a shout out to Mary Etta Parkinson, your aunt. She sent me a message on Facebook and talked about your book and encouraged me to reach out to you and get you on the podcast. And I think it's about the same time I saw on your Facebook that you had written this book. So her prompting and me seeing your post, thought, we need to get you on the podcast, Dr. Parkinson.
I'm glad she sent you that. That impulse.
Anyway, so this is, I don't think Dr. Parkinson's going to tell you everything about the book, because I think he's going to give you a bit of an overview so that you will hopefully, feel impressed to buy the book, to read the book, to share it with others, because I think it just helps us understand how to support our LGBTQ friends. So with that introduction, I'll turn it to Dan to share more about his book and his story.
Yeah. So let me just say that about the book first, before we go much farther, is that the book is technically not about gay or trans or LGBTQ, although that is included in there. The book is about gender and section, specifically gender development, sexual development, and sexual differentiation, which happens to all of us, mostly in the womb, but also as we're developing as young children and adolescents, et cetera. So it's how we get our gender and how we get our sex and how we get all of our masculine and feminine traits. And obviously, gender identity and sexual orientation are super interesting traits that are masculine or feminine, right? And gendered. And so those are included as substantial sections within the book, and was a large part of my motivation for writing the book, because those are the most misunderstood things. But I really just want to give it the idea that it's got a universal appeal. Any person can read this and just understand themselves better, understand people of both gender sexes better, whether they're straight or gay or cis or trans or whatever, or non-binary. The book is for a broader audience. But the urgency in the book is really because of the current political situation and just the persecution that trans people are getting. So it's really, the timing is about helping hopefully improve the conversation so that we can get better discussions and hopefully better policies, rather than some of the sort of hateful things things based on myth that are coming out. So I wrote the book. Let me just say that I got involved with the issue, as Rich pointed out, 10 years ago, more than that, a little more, where I was just decided to participate in the online conversations. And I wanted to help LGBTQ youth because I was aware of the high suicide rate in that community in Utah and elsewhere. And so I had a background in Mormonism, but I'm not connected to the church anymore since a rather young age. So I have sort of the understanding of Mormonism and Mormon culture, but ever since around age 24, so I had not been participating or believing Mormon. So I wasn't connected to the Mormon community as an adult, particularly, but I did have enough awareness of the culture and the community because of my upbringing that I wanted to make that connection. And I was interested and concerned about that community and the LGBTQ youth living and trying to survive within it. And so I quickly got exposed to the awareness, the science that was out that time that was really proving that the most protective things you could do for LGBTQ youth was to get their parents to have a better understanding and to have a better reaction to their children coming out or being gay. And that was the research done by the Family Acceptance Project. And if you haven't heard of that, I hope you look that up and learn about the Family Acceptance Project and their recommendations about how to help lesbian and gay and trans and non-binary teens survive and thrive. And so I saw that the best thing that I could do was to help organize parents. And so I got involved in that. And it was sort of a zeitgeist time. I did do worked on a video project called I'll Walk With You, and that interviewed LDS parents. And then we started a Facebook group along with some active LDS parents. And they got this going. So it's still there. The I'll Walk With You parent Facebook group is out there. I hope Richard has a link to that he can include if any parents are hearing that haven't already connected to that. It just is a good place to navigate that space. And it's really oriented towards active, believing LDS parents of LGBTQ youth. I'm not involved in that group anymore because I sort of stepped out and left it to the people who are actually in that category that belong in the group. So, but it is thriving. They have they've helped thousands of parents adapt. And then, but in all that exposure, I also, I was able to get acquainted with Dr. William Bradshaw, and he had done a lot of work and compiling the data about some of the science around sexual orientation. And so I started to just learn about it and go beyond that and learn a lot about, and then also develop sort of a consolidated viewpoint, because I found that all the information out there was kind of specific to certain fields like embryology or social sciences, but there wasn't really something to kind of pull it all together, and particularly pull it all together in a narrative that can be understood by a non-scientist. So I had the ideas together. I decided I wanted to help people understand them better. And then the urgency kind of came a couple of years ago when like I say, when the conversation got so toxic around trans people, and they started to experience just an uptick in harassment and hate crimes. And I just realized that there's a lot of mythology out there. And so I decided that I would just write the book and present it as a set of facts that it is, not telling people what to do with the facts. I don't comment in the book on what our policies actually should be or how anyone should react. I just want them to start with the information, with correct information about why people are male and why people are female and why we have masculine traits and why we have feminine traits and why people are non-binary and why some people are gay and why some people are trans, even though most people aren't, and how that came about. And so, yeah, I think that most parents want their children, whether they're gay or straight or cis or trans, they want them to survive and thrive. And they don't always, they probably have well-intentioned, but sometimes they're going to do things that aren't going to help them survive and thrive, as the Family Acceptance Project kind of pointed out. And they give us some of the best techniques for helping them survive and thrive. But we know what helps people not survive and thrive is one, suicide and bullying and being a victim of violence, or even falling into substance abuse and things that can be outcomes of or evidence that you're not thriving, right? And so I just think that I didn't write this book telling us exactly how to, address each of those. But what I strongly believe is that having a foundation of understanding about gender and about how we develop our sexual traits and how our sexual differentiation proceeds in every human being is going to do a lot to actually help people realize some of the myths they're holding to isn't accurate, and I think that'll lead to maybe a more compassionate response to the variety of people that are out there, and also help us avoid falling into myths that can have sort of lead us to damaging, actions. So, so that's kind of where it comes from. It gives the foundation and the basis to why we have trans people, why we have gay people, why we have males and females in the first place. I mean, not why, but how we become a male or a female. So I really focus on the development of sexual differentiation, but in a way that I try to approach it as interesting and accessible to anybody. It's not written for just scientists; it's written for everybody, and all of that is relevant to trans and gay, obviously, but it's also relevant to anybody. So that's sort of why I wrote it.
What a unique book. Some of the things that I picked up from what you just said is that you're taking facts from different academic fields and trying to bring them together.
Correct.
Because there's a study of the womb, epigenetics or something like that I've heard, but I love that.
Yeah, epigenetics is one of the things I try to explain a little bit as it's relevant to this.
Which is good.
I try not to get too much into the deep science. So I introduce some terms like epigenetics, but then I define it. I explain what it is and why it's important to talk about. But I don't go and try to explain the exact epigenetic mechanism for X, Y, or Z, because that's not going to be helpful at this level. It's just to give people some overview of how things basically work.
And I love that. And then talking to people like me that aren't scientists that can read something like you've written,
right,
and give me, because of the facts presented, give me better tools to help. You've used this term frequently, which I think is great, survive and thrive, which I think is a terrific goal. I'm also reflecting just your good heart. Dr. Parkinson, here you are. I'm thinking back to the I'll Walk With You group. I hope you picked up on that. And I picked up on that, listeners, when Dr. Parkinson first reached out to me. I recognized he wasn't in the church, and I hadn't interacted with many people not in the church, and I kind of made some broad brush conclusions that they wanted the church to fail because they weren't in it. And I recognized that was very different with Daniel, that he wanted LDS parents, active LDS parents, to be able to support their LGBTQ kids and help them survive and thrive. And his agenda with that group wasn't to have everybody leave the church. It was to help LGBTQ, especially LDS LGBTQ, thrive and survive. And I sense that's kind of your focus with, obviously, the book. And you're not trying to then draw conclusions like every LGBTQ person should do this or this to survive and thrive, but help them best to self-determine that. So I just love your approach, and I love your good heart, and I love you're wanting the best for everybody. And
well, whether it comes from my heart or my brain, I do believe it's the best approach. Whatever I may feel about the LDS Church doesn't matter, really. If I want to effectively help youth in the church, the best thing I can do for them is help parents within the church. And some of those, there's families who have LGBTQ kids who leave the church.
Sure.
But that's not what I'm here to promote or discourage, neither one. They have to make their decisions. But in the end, the more that stay or the longer they stay, the more they can do for the LGBTQ youth that are there. And so anyone who's there, like you, like my Aunt Marietta, if they're in a congregation and if they're a valued member of their congregation, but there's a gay youth in their midst or parents of a gay youth, they're going to know who to talk to, and they're going to have that person there who's going to be a resource, and they're going to make a big difference in the life of that person. And if they're gone, like I can't say that everyone can stay, but if they're gone, they certainly can't make a difference in that way. So my strategy in forming the group was just give people a place where they could learn to do the best thing for their kids, but at the same time, some of them stay in the church, or a lot of them, or at least not run out the door so fast, or whatever. Just do what they have to do that's best for them, but also what's best for the rest of their community.
Thank you for doing that.
Does that make sense?
It does. It's a great answer. And yeah. I think one day you just remove yourself as an admin from the group, and maybe that was always your vision, that LDS parents in that group could run the group. I don't know if we ever thanked you in the group because you were gone, but I'd like to thank you for, starting that group and, what it did for me as an ally, let alone what it does for LDS parents with LGBTQ youth. And so thank you, Daniel, for that part of your ministry, to use LDS terms, to help people survive and thrive. But keep talking about your book or whatever you'd like to talk about.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm hoping that this conversation will lead people to be interested in the book. And I'm hoping that people read it, because I really think it's helpful to understand that it gives you you get a perspective, and you get to step back a little and say, oh, that's what's going on. And then you can break away from so many myths. And let me just mention some myths, that people have. There's these problematic myths. I don't talk about this in the book, but I'm talking about it now because this is why I wrote the book. And the book doesn't only focus on trans, but I'm going to mention a few things that do focus on trans, because that's what's in the public discussion right now. And one is that people choose to be trans, or that people are groomed to become trans. Unfortunately, that's just not accurate. It's just not something that people choose. People have a gender identity. And there's another myth. There's a lot of people out there saying on YouTube that there's no such thing as a gender identity, that's not a thing. But that's, just thoroughly wrong. We have a gender identity. Each one of us has a strong sense of what sex we are, and it's part of us, built into our brains. And not just humans, but animals, they don't know in the same way, because they don't have the same kind of mindset of what a gender is. But, I talk about in the book about these herds of bighorn sheep, they herd in male herds. Well, they wouldn't be able to herd in male herds unless each individual of the group would know the difference between a male and a female, and also know which one they are, right? So they have a conviction that they belong in this group, right? And humans have that too. We have a conviction of what gender we belong to. And so we all have a gender identity. And what's particular in humans is that sometimes the gender identity is divergent from what our bodies might have developed. And that's when someone is trans. And so they have, I don't want to call it a mismatch, because that implies it's pathological. No, it's just the variety of humans. And within the variety, we have people with a really strong gender identity that matches perfectly for them. Most of the audience has that. They have a strong sense that they're male or female, and that matches what their bodies. But there are some people who don't have a strong sense. A lot of people who consider themselves non-binary. In fact, they don't feel super strongly that they're male or female, but they feel strongly that they're either both or neither. And then there's a large number who just are completely divergent. They just feel like, even though they're development was basically male as far as their body goes, that they feel like they're female fundamentally at their core. And so that's what a gender identity is. And that sort of helps you to understand what a trans person is. And it also helps you understand that this is something that comes about because of a specific structure and structures and brain tissues and how they develop in your brain when you're developing, and how that happens. And so the fact that you have a gender identity and that it's a certain way, you therefore can't suddenly be convinced that you're something that you're not. Nobody will ever be able to convince you. You might, face confusion in your life. So you might not, have a full awareness. There's some of that, especially with someone who has gender identity that's unexpected. And so having a supportive person around you might help you understand it better. But you can't call that grooming, because grooming is implying that we're creating something out of someone who wasn't that before, and now all of a sudden they are. So, I have to give this caveat. We have to leave room that there's some confusion in the process, especially, early in life. Adolescents can be confused. So I don't want to imply that that doesn't happen, and that sometimes that there aren't any examples of someone who was temporarily confused about their gender identity or about their sexual orientation. But I just want to really reinforce that it is something that's there, that they may be trying to fight against or deny or be confused about, but it's sort of fundamentally set, and it's probably not going to change, at least very much, and certainly won't change as a result of any therapies that might be offered or any efforts someone might make. Once again, that doesn't determine what they do or what decisions they make, but the basic thing, it's just there. It's a brain structure. It's one of our characteristics. It's how we are. And so the book helps people understand. It doesn't address those things I just addressed, but what it does, it just explains what the gender identity is and why we have it and why everybody has one and how we got it and what it is. But it also talks about that among a big list of masculine or feminine traits. If I have a gender identity that I'm a male, which I do, you would say that I have this trait, this structure in my brain, and it's masculinized. And someone who has a gender identity that's feminized will strongly believe they're female. And most females have that, most people we would call female, women have. So the book explains how that comes about. And that not just that, but there's hundreds of gender traits, right? How I throw a baseball or a projectile, that's a gender traits. There's a difference in how most males throw a ball compared to how most females throw a ball. And there are differences, and they found is basically based in the brain. And so it's a different trait that's also masculinized or feminized. And so the gender identity is just one of those traits. Throwing a baseball is another. How interested we are in auto mechanics is another one of those traits. It's kind of gendered. And so I talk about a number of these traits and explain how they develop, and also pointing out that any individual will have, no matter who they are, no matter how masculine or feminine they are, they're going to have some of both. Every individual, you and me, we have some masculine traits and some feminine traits. And most males have mostly masculine traits, but no male has every masculine trait. They have some feminine traits. There's nobody there. There's not a man out there, no matter how masculine, who doesn't have some feminine traits. And that's also kind of an important part of the story. We all have some in there in some ways, some femininity and different potentials. So I explain why and why that might be different, why we might have some masculine traits and some feminine, why we have all these gay men, some of them some feminine and some of them don't, and why we might have an auto mechanic who's super interested in ballet dance, versus, or why there might be this very heterosexual woman who's a tomboy, all of these things. So the book gets into that and explains it in a way that, and I wish I could just sum it up briefly, but unfortunately you got to kind of start at the beginning and to really understand it. I can basically say, yeah, it happens when we're developing the embryos, and the testosterone plays a huge role, and our genes play a huge role. But to really understand it, you've got to hear the whole story, and I try to present it in an order that makes sense.
That's just super helpful, Daniel, and for our listeners, and hopefully people will read your book, because I've always felt, we share a lot of stories here, but we don't talk as much about the science. And I've always felt science is our friend, and I've always felt that if we could go 50 years in the future and read the science about why some people feel, are trans or non-binary, that we'll have more insights than we do now.
Right.
And so I'm really grateful for your work. Is there much science? I know there's, like Swyer syndrome, there's some things that we've understood from if I'm using the right term, biological or chromosome standpoint. We can understand why someone's trans, but there's a lot of people who are trans that don't, we have no sort of scientific backstory at this point, why they're trans. So sometimes we dismiss that unless there is sort of a story that we can totally understand. Is there much science at this point? And maybe that's what your book is helping us understand, what is there and what perhaps can still be researched.
Exactly. That's the broad belief out there, is that we don't understand, but the truth is we do. I mean, not very many people do, though. That's the problem. But that's why I wrote the book, is because we do know why people are trans. I mean, we don't know everything about why people are trans, but we know the basic chain of events that leads someone to be trans or to be gay or to like football. We know how this happens. And so part of it, what we do in the book is I take the concepts of embryology. We know how development works. We know how our brain develops. And we know how it develops is really consistent from one thing to the next. So I may not be able to tell you exactly what part of the brain tells you you're trans or whatever, or not trans, cis. I hope everyone understands cis just means you're not trans. So most of us are cis. So when I say cis, just accept that I'm talking about most everybody. So what part of the brain is that in? Well, that we don't know. And that's the part that'll be really interesting to discover and to know exactly where it is. But what we do know is that it is in the brain. So that's pretty important. And how do we know it's in the brain? Well, everything is in the brain about our personalities, Every personality, every drive, every appetite, it's in our brain. And that's what makes us unique individuals. It's all there. And it's based on structures in our brain. And the structure isn't just in one place, but it's, I compare it to your iPhone, your smartphone. In your smartphone, you have an app, and the app works in a certain way, right? And it draws, the app is located in your cell phone in a certain block of memory, but it also every app draws in other parts of the phone, other parts of the hard drive, other parts of the, graphics card, the speakers, it draws in all the parts of your cell phone when it's in play. But it's very specific parts, but they're spread out all over. But it's still a specific structure that, an all-knowing person could say exactly the points of your cell phone that's in play, even though no human could actually do that. Your brain's the same way. Everything is sort of stored there in a structure. Every memory is sort of stored somewhere in your brain and somehow in your brain. And it all plays together in a certain way. And so these apparatuses we have are like apps. And I even refer to them as apps because it's convenient. An app on your phone, an apparatus can use the same abbreviation. So I kind of refer to these apparatuses as brain apps. And we have one. We have, for everything we do, we have an app for learning a language. We have an app for throwing a ball. It the parts of our brain that are involved in throwing a ball, and our balance, and perceiving where we need to throw it, and judging how hard we need to throw, and make the muscles move, and knowing the positions of our arms and legs, all that comes together in an apparatus that's throwing. We have another apparatus that determines how much we're interested in auto mechanics. And so these are all succinctly located, and they're based on some hardware. And that hardware, which is your brain cells and their connections, has to be created in the first place. And that's created when we're embryos. That's created when we're fetuses. That hardware, our brains are built layer on layer, and it's built in a way that's impacted by testosterone that happens to be there, especially if you're a male. There's a lot more testosterone. So that causes it to develop in slightly different ways. So our brains just grow, every one of these apparatuses grow, and they grow at different timings and at different times. So each one of them becomes either more masculine or feminine based on a lot of things, based on our genes, based on how much testosterone is present that day, based on what the mother's going through at the moment can impact that. So many things can impact that. And so I describe just how it all works and why a person can be super masculine, but they might turn out gay, or a person might be a trans male, like someone who has a body that appears to be, I'm sorry, I just confused myself. Say we have someone with a body that appears to be a male. They're born with male genitalia, but they feel like they're a woman, so they're a trans female, right? But their sexual orientation may or may not match that. You'd kind of expect, well, if the testosterone did it, then most trans females would also be sexually attracted to men. But it's not that easy because it's a different apparatus. We have a different apparatus that makes our gender identity than what makes our sexual orientation. And on the other hand, a gay man might have other, like me, might have other traits that are feminine, but I might have other traits that are very masculine. And it's because each of those traits has its own pathway of development. And they might, whatever might have made a person gay might also work that way on, have a feminizing effect, let's say a male person gay you'd say they have a feminized effect on their sexual orientation. Whatever did that to that might do it to another trait, but it might not. And so there's just this vast mosaic of outcomes. And that's why you see straight people who might seem super feminine, straight men who might seem super feminine, or straight women who might seem super masculine. But you also have gay women who seem super feminine and others who seem super masculine. And there's just a wide variety of how people turn out. And so I kind of put that out there as to why is that. And so as far as the science goes, like I say, the science comes from generalizing. So we just have observed that these developmental pathways follow really consistent principles, right? You have genes that code for them. You have timing. So timing is really critical. They start to develop into a particular structure at a certain part of gestation. And you have the influences that impact what happens. So important influence is the testosterone. So the testosterone levels during these important periods when it's developing play a big role, but other things also play a role. The original genes play a role. The testosterone plays a role. The toxins in the environment play a role. The maternal stress at that time might play a role, and how that all happens. And so when you look at my examples, I give some examples that illustrate the principles, but not every example could you say is 100% proven. So it's science in that it's the way science works. We have a model and the models work. That's why we're able to make scientific progress. We have a model of what gravity is, and that's a very useful model because we fly ships to the moon and have satellites based on this model of gravity. So there's a lot we don't understand about gravity, but this model gives us a really true and useful way of looking at gravity that we can apply. And even if we learn something about gravity that totally changes how we see it, it's still not going to change the calculations we use to fly to the moon or put satellites into place. And the reason I say that is because this is true about the research I use to support the conclusions that are made in this book. It's just using the general concepts that are basically proven about how everything develops, and then applying it to a lot of specific situations. So it leaves room to be improved on as more research comes out, but it also gives you an accurate idea, a really accurate overview, because we do know enough to know that the overview does fit and the overview does work. And so it is scientifically sound. But this book isn't talking about the science. This book is talking about how it works. I don't cite all the studies in that. That's for another book that maybe I'll write or maybe someone else will have to. But the research is out there. I just pulled it all together into a narrative, into a course, you might say, a way to just understand it all, which is how we learn.
No one's done a book like this that I'm aware of that's come on the podcast or that I've read. There's just such a need for it. And I love you bringing your professional work, your academic understanding, and all the experience you have in this space, just to help us better.
It's kind of surprising that no one's done the book, or maybe they have, and I just can't find it. But I'm really surprised no one's written this book already, to tell you the truth.
Just a few thoughts as Dr. Parkinson is talking. Those of you that are LDS and sort of believe in LDS theology, I've always felt the priesthood or science is an insight into how God's priesthood works to create things. And so I've always felt that science is our friend, and it's just an insight into how God's power works. And in this case, to create the beautiful diversity that I think is intentional for the human family. And I think the creation story, listeners, and in Genesis, and so much of that creation story is diversity and beauty. And my feeling, now that I've been in this space a long time, is that, I sort of thought, that everybody wasn't straight or cis. Something had kind of gone wrong. And I don't feel that anymore. I feel that everybody is created as intentional, and they need to feel good about how they're created. And Dr. Parkinson is helping us understand how that works. But to me, that's intentional by God to create the beautiful, diverse human family. And I think back to the Family Acceptance Project, the earlier younger people can accept who they are. If they're not straight or cis, the better chance they have to survive and thrive, and really own this about them and recognize that it's a good thing, and why they may be a gender minority or sexual minority, and it can be difficult. A lot get to the space where this is good, and I'm glad, and I wouldn't press a button to change this, because this is how I'm meant to be. And I'm able to accomplish my life mission and in a way that's unique to who I am. And I love that. And I think, so I think science is our friend. The other thing I like about you talking about this diversity is that sometimes I want everything to fit into my story about other people. So I remember the few gay men I met before I stepped into space all kind of fit the model. But then I met enough gay men that I sometimes joke, listeners, my gaydar is terrible, because my story has really changed about trans people and LGBTQ people, because there's so much difference. I guess what I'm also saying is I'm inviting you, if you've met just a few LGBTQ people, most people haven't even met a trans person in the United States, or met one at the most, is don't then take that as every trans person is like that, or every gay woman is like this, or every non-binary person is this. There's a lot of stories within each of those umbrella labels, and take the time, don't sort of write your story about this group of people before you meet a lot of people in this space. I remember a time my son was playing high school basketball, and and the other team usually beat us up, and there were some pretty big guys on that team. I remember number 4 player was who my son matched up against, and then about a year later, that kid came out as gay, and and walked into my home on the podcast, and he was about the toughest athlete on that team. So that sort of changed my story about gay men when I met him, because he didn't fit any of the, he pretty good athlete, and wasn't afraid to take on my son on the number 4 position underneath the hoop. So I think science is our friend. So I want to send it back to Dr. Parkinson to keep sharing.
Well, that just reminds me. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist, so what I do all day long is I help people understand the mental illness they might be facing. And what you just said about those things apply to so many human conditions, good or bad, right? When people come to me and say, well, am I bipolar? Am I, and I say, well, first of all, whenever we say a diagnosis like bipolar, we're just talking about a set of symptoms, okay? But there's 5 billion people on the planet, or more than that. There's really 7 billion presentations, right? And we wouldn't call them all bipolar, but if we called, 5% of those bipolar, we have, 500 million people who we might call bipolar, but it's really 500 million different conditions. The only reason it's useful to call them bipolar is because it helps me choose the medicine that might help them. But to even call it a disorder is problematic, because for some people it's not a disorder, right? It's just how they are, and they're fine with that. And everyone around them is fine with it. So my goal as a psychiatrist is just to help them have a happier life. And if I need to call them bipolar because that helps the medical insurance pay for them, and it helps me decide what medicine to put them on, we're going to do that. But I don't want them to sum up their identity. They're a unique human that also has these things that fit bipolar. And so the same might be true of gay or trans, but their own version of it. And I reluctant to say bipolar, gay, and trans, just because I don't want anyone to imply that I'm talking about mental illnesses. I could also put professors, everyone's, got all these things they are, but it doesn't summon them up. It's useful in this context. I don't know if that makes sense, but it certainly applies to a lot of things that we're anxious. And I think categorizing is useful, like I say, and these stereotypes I talk about in the book, these stereotypes have a place because it tells us what a lot of people are like. But we also, every time we apply a stereotype, we also have to say, and there's so many exceptions to this stereotype that if we're not taking that into account, we're gonna get it wrong for an individual. Even if a group tends to have X, Y, or Z, this group of people who I'm calling bipolar, this group of people I'm calling university professors have this trait that's X, Y, or Z, it's never going to sum up all of them. So
it's really helpful. I've got another question for you, or would you rather talk more about your book?
No, let's go with questions. I think we could talk about the book a lot, but it's like I say, if you don't present it kind of in the order I presented in the book, it gets confusing. And I tried to get it very concise and as short as I could, but I couldn't have made it shorter. So sometimes just trying to describe it on a podcast is almost counterproductive, unless it helps make you interested in reading it. So yeah, I'd welcome the questions.
Yeah. One statement, listeners, and then a question. I remember now messaging you when I was trying to figure out is if a trans woman is with a cis male, does that mean they're straight or not? And you took this is me just recognizing you're a busy professional, but you were over several years, multiple times, helping me understand this space as I was curious. And you were very fact-based and very thoughtful and also very nuanced. You never kind of gave me a black and white answer. You gave me kind of a thoughtful umbrella answer that was actually more helpful for me in the long run. So I think that's just a reflection of your style and this book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. My question is,
Yeah, and let me just say, I took big efforts to try not to be confusing, because if you say, well, is this cis woman
yeah,
gay or is this trans woman gay? So in a way, that the way I wrote up might end up bothering some readers who are trans, because I kept the language to a universal language. I didn't try to say, it without in answering that question, I have to define, well, what's gay, what is trans, So I just took it away and said, well, if they have, based on the definition we're using, you know, is there sort of a divergence or an agreement? If they have a feminized sexual orientation and they have a feminized gender identity, then um, they're not divergent in those traits. And whether you're going to call that gay or not is going to get down to how exactly you're defining gay. And that's the societal debate that I didn't try to get part of. The language is what the debate's about, right? And I didn't want to really weigh in on the language so much as just getting the facts behind how we're using the language, so that when we're having this discussion about how we're using the language, we can all kind of agree what we're talking about.
It's terrific.
But you were about to ask me something else before I went off on that.
No, it's you kind of started at the beginning with all the fear-based rhetoric directed to trans people, and they've sort of become, I call it common enemy intimacy, listeners. The Brene Brown term is we just create sometimes common enemy around a new threat, and it creates fear and votes and community, but it's not, to me, consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and marginalizes a group of people that are really struggling versus having lots of kind comments. But do you see this pattern repeated throughout history? Can you share with our listeners, like, I know you're not a history professor, but just times when we've done this in the past to help us realize that we've done this and we might be doing it again. We've gotten over it in the past, and now we don't look at a group of people that way. Any thoughts come to your mind on that question?
Yeah. Let me just say that this is, like I say, outside of what I try to do in the book, because in the book, I really just present facts, okay, and not what we should do with the facts. But I guess there's the underlying assumption that I'm giving the facts so that we can do something nice with them, right? And use them to not, to do a better good in the world. So let me just talk then as a psychiatrist again, as someone who's a professional who specializes in biology, physiology, but also neurology and social sciences, especially behavior sciences. Okay. That's kind of what a psychiatrist does, and that's how I come together. And so if we talk about this idea, xenophobia, xenophobia is a broad term that includes sort of a fear of the outsider, a fear. So you can put sexism, racism, nationalism, homophobia, transphobia, put all those things in xenophobia, Islamophobia, Christianophobia, whatever phobia. All of those are part of the broader picture of xenophobia. It's a fear of the other. And that's a human characteristic, for better, for worse. We all have this. It's sort of ingrained into us. So some of these repeating stories in history are happening because of how our brains are wired. We have an important tendency to have a group cohesion. And this has been important for our human survival. So this is programmed into our brains. We develop as embryos in the same way we develop a tendency to. So I'm describing something that's a lot like what I describe in the book about our genders. We develop based on our genes and how our brains develop. And we develop this structure that does things like it recognizes who's in our group and who's not. So from a very early age, we're starting to categorizing who belongs to our group and who doesn't. And this is an important part. We have it. But what that did in history, you can imagine that, when we were wandering in the woods, hunting, and if we came across somebody, we had to sort of ascertain whether they were danger, whether we're competing with them, whether they were danger, whether they were likely to steal our food or likely to put one of us in danger. And we just sort of developed this reaction to be afraid of the other one, of the other tribe, the people who look different or talk different or have different habits. And so that's this general thing that's programmed into us, the xenophobia. So that is something that everyone in the group was able to unite around. So as we grew into these big civilizations, that trait didn't go away. We still have it. And it manifests in a way that was really useful for most of our history, but now sometimes it's manifesting in ways that aren't useful, and it leads us to look for the outsider or invent the outsider so that we can have the united. And our brains are primed to really want to put someone in that category as outsider. But people who are raised from a young age, if you raise someone from the age of 2 in an environment where there's people of all colors, they don't see people of different colors as outsiders. If you raise a cat with a bunch of dogs, the cat's going to not see the dogs as outsiders, right? So they're like us. But if you raise people, like nowadays, gay people get a lot less xenophobia. They get a lot less homophobia because things have gotten better. And what's happened? Well, people are now raised recognizing there's gay people around them and they see gay people in their lives. And it's become such that they're not facing the outsider status as much. Some places they are. There's plenty of places in the world where they are. But in the United States now, it's changed a lot in the past 20 years and the past 30 years. It's changed a lot. And so the gay people are no longer the outsiders. And so they can always, there's still plenty of places and environments where they are, but just in general, just the difference is so big. But it hasn't happened yet very much for the trans people. And so they still are having this outsider status because people don't realize, oh yeah, they're around us. People didn't have the chance to be raised with trans people. I didn't. So no matter what happens in my life, I'm always going to have part of my brain who's going to see them as an outsider, and that's going to impact me. And so my job is to recognize it, be aware of that, and try my best to not let that impact how I treat people, and try to base it on a more loving, more compassionate, or at least a more informed set of information rather than simply seeing them as the outsider. If that all makes sense, that's sort of my diatribe of where it comes from, a point of view of our brains, right? And that's why sometimes we say, well, everybody's a racist. Now, people don't like to hear that, but you have to know what I mean. If I say everybody's a racist, I'm just saying that anyone who grew up in America in my generation got so many messages from a very young age that we can't help it have absorbed some of that, right? And so the only thing we can do is just sort of say, yes, I got these racist things ingrained into my head. I'm not going to get rid of them, but I can recognize them and try my darndest not to let them impact how I treat people of other races. So that's based on my brain. It's there because of my brain and what happened to it. And now I'm set with a different set of challenges compared to someone who's 5 years old now and is hopefully in some parts of the US in a less racist environment, right? And they're growing up. And so hopefully they won't be racist or will have a lot less racism.
Super helpful.
So I'm hoping that you see how that all relates to transphobia or to homophobia or to any kind of xenophobia.
So that was a really helpful segment for me, listeners. To be honest, I've heard the term xenophobia. I've never heard it defined until Dr. Parkinson just did it.
Maybe there's better definitions than that.
But it's back to your kind of nuances that we do need group cohesion. That was part of, so you normalize the tendency within us, but then you invite us to, that there's this fear of the outsider, but then you pivot a little bit. I wrote down some terms you use. Sometimes then we look for the outsider or we invent the outsider. And I just think, it's just an invitation to do better. I've always, once I tweeted out that if your religion or your political party causes you to have fear of others or fear of the future, you need a different take on your religion or political party. Because I've always felt, back to LDS theology, the gospel of Jesus Christ is full of hope and for the future, for now, and even in LDS theology, that we all are spirit children of the same heavenly parents. So none of us are outsiders based on our theology. For those of you that are LDS, we're actually all children of the same heavenly parents. And this beautiful diversity that sometimes causes us to feel that there's outsiders. Sure, we need to have boundaries when there's threats. Isn't like that, but it's just giving a whole group of people outsider status. And sometimes those people are in our families and they're listening to everything we hear and say about people like them because they're closeted and they need to know that they're safe and loved. And often we do that by just saying kind things about all sorts of groups of people. So that was super helpful for me and just helps me. And you also normalize that sometimes we have just racist thoughts or homophobic or transphobia thoughts. And maybe normalizing those is a way to recognize those in ourselves and make sure that we can see that and recognize that that is a thought, that is something I don't want to act on.
Not endorse. Endorsing is different, but normalizing and saying, yes, that's going to happen, and don't feel shame about that.
Exactly.
It's inevitable.
That's great.
But meanwhile, don't stop making the effort to not work on that and not let it affect you, right? Not let it affect your interactions with others.
This is another question, just because you're so good at this. Just talk to LDS parents with a queer kid. That could be a whole nother podcast, but maybe they're just new on this road or they think they have a queer kid. And I realize every situation's different and you don't want to get into, but just some general principles or general advice you give to LDS parents on this road.
Yeah. The first thing is, you already mentioned that the damage can be done long before you have a queer kid, right? So to anybody who's out there, you just need to always speak with compassion. And unfortunately, sometimes what you think is compassionate doesn't sound compassionate. I would encourage everybody to just step in the shoes of a person who is, in any category and just say, well, how will they feel if we have this particular attitude? So I'm hoping everyone can kind of do that just to be better humans. But to be more specific, if you are already down the road of thinking your kid might be gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary, you can say things on a regular basis, just saying how you think, anything positive you can say about those people that you see in the media or in your lives. Anything positive you can say about a gay person. If you have a gay friend, invite them over. If they can see that you can have a normal relationship with a gay adult or a gay person, then they're going to find it easier to feel accepted within your family. So I'd encourage everyone to do that anyway, but certainly if you start seeing you have a child that you're wondering about that no matter what you do, if you give them that message, even if they end up not being gay, it's going to help them. They're going to realize that they can trust you with their reality, whatever their reality might be. So that's important. And then the other is be ready to respond with love, no matter what they tell you, and accept what they tell you. And a child can be confused, and there's cases out there. I know of one where a teenager told her parents that she was a lesbian. And I don't want to promote this too big because this isn't the normal thing, but they accepted her. They helped her, affirm herself. They did an amazing job at moving her towards self-acceptance, showing her they'd accept her. Well, in the end, she, I don't know if she's bisexual, but in the end, she wasn't exclusively a lesbian, but she had this level of acceptance that gave her an amazing relationship with her parents, and she ended up marrying a guy. So, like I said, I haven't asked her what box she fits herself into, but I do know that it was a super positive experience for this family, even though it became sort of a non-issue in their actual lives. There was no damage done by really embracing her, affirming her, and giving her a lot of love and support through a process, even though it, is hard for an LDS family to do that because it doesn't fit into the regular narrative of what LDS families do. So, so if that makes sense,
Very
embrace
helpful.
the child and allow them the freedom to determine their own life, and teach them morals. And remember, I think that there's some universal morals, which is don't harm other people, right? One thing that the LDS Church does, then I know from my background, is we don't distinguish these different types of morality. But there's a kind of morality which is basically sexual morality, right? And we give that a huge amount of importance. Mormons, LDS people do. But there's this other realm of morality that is, in my opinion, extremely important, which is don't hurt people. Is this behavior, don't kill people, honor your family members, love people. This is an extremely important morality that is shared. And so if you have a disagreement about some details of sexual morality, it doesn't mean that morality is thrown out the window. It means, and even say a gay or a lesbian person, they still have sexual ethics, and so they might, I don't want to prescribe what any person's ethics should be, but a gay person does need to take into account sexual fidelity, or just like a straight person, or long-term relationships. And I can't say that any one person is always going to reach the same conclusions about what the sexual ethics are. But what can I say? What I can say is that a developing adolescent, if they're going to be gay or straight or trans, they're not throwing morality out the window. They need to have models of healthy relationships, like their parental relationship. And so I hope the parents won't get stuck on the one moral issue that they see as a moral issue that they disagree on, when there's this huge other areas where they could have a wonderful influence on the moral development of that teenager. Does that all make sense in a way that doesn't sound like I'm being too judgy in how I see Mormons?
I think that's terrific. It's just a really thoughtful answer that I agree with. And I just, I remember going back to one of my favorite LDS Institute teachers, Michael Wilcox, just talked about the fundamental principle of different religions. He studies all these other religions. He's LDS, but he talks about charity is a big word, a big, part of our religion, but that exists in other religions like compassion and just different. So these principles of how you treat each other and a moral compass to guide your future. If you're part of an organized faith and you're straight, it's sometimes easier to do that. But if that's not going to be your path,
well, it's certainly easier to have models of how to.
But if that's not going to be your path, I think even if that is your path, I think having really good moral principles, that are sort of humanistic principles that are, I think, founded in great faiths and great people that aren't of faith, but still have great guiding principles, is a really good way to live your life. So I think that's very pragmatic, helpful advice.
And that's what your teens need, all of them, the straight ones and the gay ones and the cis ones and the trans ones and the non-binary. They all still need a moral compass, and they will have to They will make their own determinations about their own morality and how that impacts their eventual relationships in life. But the vast majority of the morality you hold as parents is going to pass on to every one of your children, even if there's an exception on a certain point, right? So remember that.
I love that. Anything else you'd like to share with us? We're kind of coming to the end, Dr. Parkinson. Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, thank you. I just want to say, do a request that if you find the information in the book helpful, I put it out there because I think it's helpful information. And I'm guessing that some of your listeners will read it. If you do read it, especially if you're not connected with me, please leave a review on Amazon. The reason I'm asking to do that is because that, if you're not my Facebook friend, it helps the algorithm of Amazon so that the book gets put in front of more eyes, right, as an option. And the reviews are really what make the big difference. So besides just telling your friends about it, because like I say, I did this to get it out there, and if nobody reads it, the information won't be in anybody's head. And that's really my goal, is to get the information in people's heads so it can have a good impact. And you can help by leaving a review, especially if you're what it's called a confirmed buyer. So if you buy the ebook, which is super cheap, you can just leave a review and you're a verified purchaser, which makes a big difference too. So that's my little sales pitch. So the information gets out there. I'm never going to make money off this book, but if there is some funds come in, I'm really going to use them to promote the project more and to expand it. So it will go good use, but I really don't anticipate there's going to be any profit, but just FYI.
Well, it's a labor of love, and just, from that message in August of 2016 to now, just thank you for those 8 years for you've done for LDS families with queer kids, and before that time, and what you continue to do with this book. Listeners, this book is called Gender Revealed, Becoming Male or Female. And I will leave a link in the show notes to Amazon. Encourage you to buy the book, share it with others.
And if you don't see the link, if you just type in Gender Revealed, Becoming Male or Female, Daniel Y. Parkinson, you're for sure going to be directed to that.
And so that's great. We'll link to the I'll Walk With You Facebook group. And please leave not only buy the book, but share it with others, but, please leave a review on Amazon so more people can get to this really good content. And thank you, Dr. Parkinson, for writing this book, taking time out to be on the podcast, and just all you've done to help people and help people find in your professional work and this sort of this side gig, so to speak. It doesn't really part of your professional assignment, but you've just felt impressed to help other people. So thank you for that. And the world's a better place because of you and your work. And those of you that are going down this road of psychiatry, of a couple young men in our neighborhood that are on your career path, and anybody that's going to social work and therapy, just thank you for the work you're doing. It's really needed. Your skills you're learning and be able to bring hope and healing and better tools to navigate your life. I'm grateful for all of you, and some of you that are just starting on that path. I think it's worth it. You're going to have great paydays as you help people. So with that, we'll sign off. This is Dr. Parkinson.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And Richard Osler signing off on an episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.